I didn't put lobby there. You know, normally we always have lobby, media, and go on with the 5 chapters, but nothing was going on with lobby at this point, so lobby isn't listed. Grassroots. It's a calling campaign. I'm going to have Dolly talk on this, okay? You'll
Sure.
probably have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I just did that. I think I'm
Okay.
good. Basically, what we're hearing from National is that the little warning slide that says decide if you want to make phone calls or not because of COVID, there may be people overwhelmed in Washington, that little warning is going to go away. So we are going to re-up the calling campaign here in Grand Rapids. Shirley and I are going to be contacting a lot of people who had signed up to kind of reboot everything, because I think with COVID, everything sort of got slowed down. And I think it's time, especially as we come into a more political season, that we make our voices known.
Okay, good. And so if you were signed on for a calling campaign before, you will be getting most likely a notice from Shirley and Dolly. And you will have an opportunity also to sign on if you were not signed up before to be a part of the calling campaign. It works very nice. You either get a text or an email saying that it's your time to call, and you have a leeway of whenever you want to make that call. And there's a script if you need it. If you don't, that's fine, and it goes from there. And it's only once a month, so it's not much time it takes any to do it. Next is get out the vote. All of these pieces are falling under grassroots, as working with the community around. And we're needing volunteers now for a small committee to work in collaboration with voters. And I'm going to switch to the next screen because that addresses this piece specifically. I'm getting there it is. Okay, John, did you want to speak to this at all?
Yes. I
Okay.
can't see the screen, but I'll just go from memory. Voters Not Politicians we're going to collaborate with them. We like their platform, empowering citizens, voice, politics, bipartisan, a lot in common here. 3 possible ways to participate. First one, make telephone calls on their phone bank. Secondly, they have texting kind of workshops, because oftentimes people don't take phone calls from people they don't know this time of year. The third one is more interesting. Across the state, Voters Not Politicians is working on ways to immediately make it easier and safer to vote. For example, they got approval and found funding to have a drop-off box outside one of the town halls in Muskegon, so you can drop your ballot at any time. On the east side of the state, they've had people extend voting hours, increase staffing, open 1 more office here and there. They're pushing this it's at the clerk level throughout the state. This is lobbying, quite honestly, which we are supposed to do. If you are interested in lobbying the clerk in your area, put your name in the chat. We'll connect you with Kim from Voters Not Politicians. She'll connect you with the Voters Not Politician representative in your area so you can work with them. You will be working as a volunteer for Voters Not Politician, but advances our agenda, our aims, and it seems like a very benevolent and synergistic thing to do. I'm geeked, as you can tell.
And for those, to make sure a reminder, and if you don't know how to use chat, because I didn't know for a couple of months, you go at the bottom, you click on the chat, open it up, go at the bottom, type your message, and hit the return button. That's how it puts it in there, okay? So if you're, we're trying to get enough of us together to be able to do this, and we were trying to look for the best organization to collaborate. And with John's work, he came up with, I mean, we knew Voters Not Politicians were out there, and they have the best organization already set up, and fit our criteria being bipartisan or nonpartisan. So, okay. Flip back to the other screen, please. Okay, so that takes care of two of the well, all of the grassroots. Grass tops thing, I can only say that we had a meeting yesterday, and you should be very proud of your grass tops team. This is an incredible group of people. Some of these people are sitting right now on this call. They're doing wonderful work, and I can't say enough. Thank you, thank you. All right, chapter development. Discussion series about diversity and environmental justice, which came out of our June meeting. We had a great discussion. We also, hopefully, if you weren't present at the June meeting, you had a chance to see it in the newsletter, and you could watch what the June meeting was all about and the discussion that we had. And from that, we formed a discussion group called on white fragility, and according to the guidelines of the study group of white fragility, they recommend 5 to 8 people. Well, we've maxed out at 10, so that little discussion group is filled. It's not my style to be closed like that, but we had to on this particular subject. But from this point forward, our next discussion in August, which we haven't set the date yet, nor what we're going to be focusing on, we'll try to open it up for more people that can be participants. So I'm just saying that. So if you're not able or haven't been signed up to be a part of the discussion and weren't able to get into that, you'll have more opportunity. And we're going to continue these kinds of discussions, not necessarily always focused on diversity, but people enjoy this and being able to talk about it. Our whole thing in the question, several of you asked this question in the June meeting, what are we going to do about this and changing and becoming more diversified just in our chapter alone as CCL? And it's an excellent question. We're tackling it from looking at what Robin DiAngelo's book on white fragility. Yes, there's been a lot of controversial articles out there about this, but this is the approach we're taking right now on it, and we certainly will look at others. So that's out there. Upcoming meetings, you're going to see a couple of slides on this one, but August, we're looking for help particularly in spreading the word to educators and young students. This is going to be a fascinating meeting. We met this afternoon with Elena and Deirdre, who will be doing the presentation, and they have excellent information, but it's particularly would be helpful. I know teachers are really spread thin right now. They're stressed, getting ready. They don't know what the year's going to be like, what they're going to be dealing with, but she actually has some excellent information for how they can work on a one-to-one advisory for this curriculum on climate change. So what we're looking for are actually names of teachers that you may know and or student organizations that we can tap into. We are spreading this on a statewide basis with the CCL chapters and working through other organizations, but your personal recommendation or referral is always helpful. So. Okay, so and then yesterday at our Grass Tops meeting, you guys that were there came up with some great ideas. September through November, this is a work in progress. We haven't been able to make the contacts. We just came up with the ideas. We're going to try to feature one candidate for state representative, a Republican or a Democrat, whoever it may be. For September, then October, and then November possibly. We'll see who we're going to feature, another one after the election. And this would be for a 20-minute program and specifically focused either on energy and alternative energy, climate change, however we pose it to them from the standpoint of what we want them to talk on. So that's what we're working on through November. Okay, next screen. What am I doing here? All right. Every month, as you know, National has CCL actions that come out on the monthly call. And I thought this was quite interesting because the actions actually are things that we are already working on, but we wanted to highlight them. So monthly calling campaign, you've already heard about that one. So signing up to be text or email. Invite a representative to monthly meetings. Well, that's what we're working on, okay? Writing Congress. I think some of you are already doing this. This is really easy. You go on the national site, of course, citizensclimatelobby.org, and you hit the tab up the top, says take action. You go in, and it does it for you. You write your ad, and it sends it out. And what the great part about this is, it's not only easy and quick, but it counts the numbers, and they go towards giving us credit in our chapter. You may not realize that we file reports monthly on all the different activities we do, all the different things. So National keeps track of those kinds of things that organizations like to do, you know, so, okay. Next, invite prominent members to monthly meetings. I kind of had to smile about that because I think that we have a lot of prominent members in our chapter, and you guys are present. But what it really means is for chapters that may not have that or who we have been inviting. You think back on all the various programs we've had for how long, and we've had some prominent members speak. So we're doing it, and we will continue to do that. And if you have suggestions on people that you would like to have speak, particularly going into 2021, please put it in the chat or let us know. You've got our email. You can always send that to us too. All right, listen to the CCL monthly July call, environmental psychologist. I am pushing this one. This is a good talk. It lasts all of 15-20 minutes. You find it on the national site. And she has some good things to talk about us who are in the work and need to stay up. It's really, I mean, I have to fully admit, I will confess, I've had some tough times through all this period of time, and combating that, you know, mild kind of downtime in the sense of, can it get any worse kind of deal, okay? She talks very clearly about that problem and how, and she goes around the country speaking to groups that are like us, and how you deal with that, and how it's best to, particularly because we are trying to establish relationships within and outside of our organization, and the ability to try to stay up about that and have a good enthusiastic attitude. So if you have a chance, now it's recorded, you can just go in, listen to it at any time. Next, creating a climate for climate education. That is what we were meeting with. Next screen, I'll go on to that one. We were meeting with Elena and Deidre this afternoon. Here's our flyer that shows it, that we're going, and we're trying to make this a bigger, like I said, a bigger event, reaching out to educators. Deidre's organization that she's responsible for is specifically focused on student groups and working within their environmental groups, so that kind of thing, and putting together resolutions to present to their superintendents or their immediate school district, or up to their community leaders and for climate change issues. So it's an interesting organization. She is coupled with Elena, who is looking at educators and helping them in curriculum in teaching climate change issues. Okay, so that's, I think I've said enough about that. Oh, oops, Dolly, sorry. Go ahead, unmute. Yeah, go ahead, unmute yourself.
I just wanted to put a plug in to listening to that environmental psychologist. I listened to that presentation, and I think there's a lot of overlap between the issues with diversity and that psychological process and the process with environmental justice and burnout and all of that. So I think it's very good to listen to for two reasons.
Okay, thank you very much, Dolly, for that. All right, next screen. this is an event coming up that's being put on by CCL on a national basis throughout the country, but we are having one here in the state of Michigan that Elizabeth Della is responsible for putting on, and her cohort, Linda Racine. It's, of course, virtual. It's Wednesday, August, you can see that if you can read that, August 5th from 6 to 8. It's learning how to use the 5 levers. Now, we function fairly strongly on the 5 teams as the 5 levers. And some of you have heard me say this already once this week, if not twice this week. We are truly the strongest chapter in the state for CCL. And so we are already practicing these 5 levers, but we still have lots to learn. So I was talking to Chris this afternoon about this. So I do plan on being a part of this. And if you want to learn more about what is the message that CCL is putting through for chapter development in the sense of the 5 levers and how we can enhance our teams, certainly there's always more to learn. This will be a good session, this one on August 5th, which Elizabeth will be in charge of. Okay, next. All right, what else is happening? I just talked about the first one. Please understand that all our meetings will be virtual through 2020. We'll see how long, we may be longer than that. And so for that reason, we are certainly looking for programs as to feature in 2021 if need be. And I've already talked about the August 20th meeting and supporting I consider Elena and Deidre is, of course, part of the Kalamazoo chapter, are prominent members of CCL who will be giving us a talk in August. And December, our national conference, you understand we have a lobby conference twice a year. The June one is, of course, the biggest one, but we usually have it in November sometime, but because of elections, this year it is in December. There'll be more information coming out about this, but you put the dates on your calendar. It's going to be the 5th and 6th, and will be interesting post-election and how CCL does that conference. So, and of course there'll be lobbying meetings set up similar to what is set up in June. Okay, next. How am I doing on time? All right, we put this out last month particularly because we were focused on diversity, but it's a statement which will ring true no matter whatever month it is. And it is important that we continue to listen to our fellow volunteers, our friends, our co-workers, neighbors, who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, BIPOC, including those who are also marginalized due to other parts of their identity, such as being LGBTQ. As white people, we will never know how it feels to live in this society and be a part of the BIPOC community, so listening is a crucial step. And certainly learning as much as we can in our relationships that we have. So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to turn it over to Justin, and welcome Justin to our group. Thank you very much, Justin. I appreciate it. We didn't do any formal introduction, so we'll have you just introduce yourself, okay? If that's all right.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is Justin Heslinga. I'm the Stewardship Director at the Land Conservancy of West Michigan. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to hear a little bit about what you all have going on, and it's important work. So thrilled that you were so well organized and keep it up, and really do appreciate the invitation today. So I'm the Stewardship Director at the Land Conservancy of West Michigan. For those of you who may be less familiar with the Land Conservancy, we are a nonprofit land trust. Office is in Grand Rapids. We cover parts of 8 counties. If you're familiar with the Lakeshore, it's essentially Saugatuck north to Ludington, and then one tier of counties inland. I'll show a map later and try to orient you a little bit to that. And in that area, we protect and restore natural land. So we do private lands conservation via conservation agreements, conservation easements. We do a lot of community partnerships where we use our expertise in land protection and land management to help other entities. And we also own land outright that we manage as nature preserves. And so I'll be talking a little bit about that, but mostly what I want to be talking about today is a couple of new initiatives that we've been working on over the last couple of years to better incorporate climate change science, climate adaptation science into our conservation planning. So I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and hopefully this works. Yeah, let's try that. All right, can you all see that okay?
Yes.
All right.
See it just fine.
All right, perfect. So let's go. Of course, now I can't toggle over. Let's just do it that way. So just a quick agenda for the next half an hour or so. Going to be talking pretty basically about how climate change has affected both our land protection, which is securing land, permanent protection from development and other factors. And then talking a little bit how climate change science has begun to affect some of our land management as well, which is our on-the-ground ecological restoration. Hope to have some time for a little Q&A at the end. I might take a break in between these two sections here. Feel free to type a question in the chat if you have it, or I don't know how you guys usually do Q&As during these meetings, but you could probably also just
Well, normally,
speak up.
I'll interrupt you, Justin. Normally, we do have it at the end, so that way you can just flow through whatever you need to. If you want to take a break, that's up to you on how you do it. But
Perfect.
so,
Well,
that way.
let's wait till the end then, and we'll do it that way. All right, so I guess the first section here is talking about our land protection efforts. So we are, as a land trust, we were really born, we've been around for over 40 years, born in the late 1970s, out of the environmental movement that really sought to save land from development. And over our 40 plus years, you know, we've done a decent job at that. I think we've protected over 11,000 acres. But in the past, it's, you know, we've had kind of our priorities. We do have criteria by which we choose certain lands to protect over others. We're not able to protect all land. All land is not necessarily high enough quality to be conservation land, that sort of thing. But we've never really sat down and formulated a real plan, a real forward-looking plan for how we're going to, what lands we're going to protect and what lands we're going to prioritize for management. And so a couple of years ago, we embarked on a process called strategic conservation planning. And for those of you maybe not as familiar with this kind of project, it's at its core, it's a mapping exercise. And so it's looking at the area of your interest and figuring out what factors are important. So this is just a general schematic. It's not real data, but say you think, okay, something about urbanization is important. Maybe this is something about a certain particular species or ecosystem. Maybe you've got some wetlands or something that you think is important. And then you use GIS software, which is mapping software, to layer those all together, smash them all together. And then you have this output that hopefully at least tells you something about the conservation value of that land. So there's more that goes into it, and there's more that's built around a strategic conservation plan than just a map. But this is really the core. And you can have as many of these criteria as you think are important. So we sat down a little over 2 years ago and started putting this together, gathering data, did a lot of research, a lot of community input, a lot of support from partners as well. And we came up with 4 fundamental layers. And so I'm just going to go through each of those so you can get a sense of what this looks like. And the first 3 I'm going to move through pretty quickly, and the last one I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, and I think you'll see why. So the first layer that we have is proximity and connectivity to existing protected areas. So just to orient you a little bit, you'll see a series of these maps. This is showing our service area. The outlines are county boundaries. Right here is Grand Rapids. This is Saugatuck down here, Ludington over here. So that's our general service area. The orange here are areas that are already protected, either by entities like us, by a lot of this is Forest Service land, state land. You can see Millennium Park right there. So all permanently protected conservation land on here. And then this particular map is a little hard to see at this scale, but what we're trying to highlight here is expanding those areas is really important, and making connections, natural connections for the movement of species and just general connectivity. So that's layer number 1. I'm not going to go into these in great detail. If you have questions, I'd be happy to take them at the end. Our second layer is all about water. So wetlands, water bodies, including rivers, lakes, wetlands, as well as upland buffers to those areas, and areas of above average groundwater recharge. So these are areas that historically we've prioritized for protection, obviously for water quality reasons, also for all the, wetlands are some of the most biodiverse and strongly ecologically functioning systems, have just tons of biomass, biodiversity, all that. There's really, water is amazing stuff, and we want to make sure that we capture that in the land that we protect. Our third layer is habitat quality. So this is looking at places that on the landscape that we know there are either rare species, rare ecosystems, highly biodiverse areas, as well as large blocks of intact habitat that are likely to hold those features. So you can see some of our Forest Service land is popping out there. A lot of this is oak savanna, Carner blue butterfly habitat, Allegan State Game area down here. Of course, this area kind of central Ottawa County and western Kent County, very agricultural, not a lot of high quality habitat there. So our first layers 1, 2, and 3 are pretty standard. We could have stopped there and we probably could have gotten a really good conservation plan, very traditional. This is the kind of stuff that conservation groups like ours have been focused on for the last, since we've been doing conservation for, the last 40 or 50 years at least. But this fourth layer is something new, and this is a layer called landscape resilience. Another way you could say this is climate change resilience. And this is a layer that came directly from the Nature Conservancy, who has been working on this research project for about the better part of a decade. And so they have climate resilience data now for, I believe, the entire US. The last little chunk just got released last year. So this is brand new data. And what this is showing is the dark green areas are areas of high landscape resilience. The brown and gray areas are lower. So developed areas, again, these agricultural areas in Ottawa County. But I guess before get into that too much, I think it behooves us to take a step back and look at a couple of definitions. So what do we mean by resilience? Site resilience is the ability of a site to support biologic diversity and ecological function, even as it changes in response to climate change. So key things here, its ability of a site to support biological diversity. It's not necessarily what biological diversity is there at the moment. So that's important. And then this focus on ecological function is really important. Making sure that things are happening, nutrient cycling, species regeneration, genetic flow between populations, all things that are critically important for sustainable ecosystems. We want to make sure that those are functioning regardless of the species or the communities that are causing that function. And that's an important point, and we'll come back to that at a couple different times a little bit later on. So then what's a resilient site? A resilient site is an area of land with sufficient variability and microclimate options to enable species and ecosystems to persist in the face of climate change. So kind of a mouthful there, but this microclimate thing is really important. So what exactly makes a site resilient? How can we go out to one area of the landscape and say, oh, this is a resilient site? What makes those areas dark green on that map? What makes other areas that brown or gray color? So if you can imagine, for instance, a flat landscape, that's an area that has low geological diversity or geodiversity. And geodiversity is one of the two components, really the main components in this concept of landscape resilience. So if you can imagine a flat landscape, maybe it's got a forest on it, maybe it's got some trees, wildlife, things like that. Imagine the sun baking down. In climate change, it's going to get hotter, drier perhaps. If the species there cannot tolerate those conditions, they either need to move somewhere else or they die. So that would be a low resilience type system. In contrast, you have a highly geodiverse or high resilience system that has a lot of topography, right? So you have, maybe this is a south-facing slope that's warmer, it's going to get more of that direct sun, and right over the hill you've got this cooler area, maybe a north-facing slope, right? And so if you're a species, could be a plant, could be an animal, whatever, and your habitat is here on this warmer slope, and that gets too hot, all you have to do is skip over. Like, it can literally be like 20 feet away and you have a great microclimate. Same with drier and wetter areas. So this hilltop is dry. Obviously you've got maybe a little lake or wetland here that's wetter. If with fluctuating precipitation that's being projected, as well as drier summers, these might fluctuate, the water level might fluctuate. But if you have wetland species down here and upland xeric species right here in very close proximity, they can simply shift back and forth across the landscape. So you still have, regardless of conditions, you still have in a very small area species diversity and ecological functions still happening. And a point to make on this is the concept of scale. Even though we're doing this strategic conservation plan at the scale of several counties, and even though this data was sort of analyzed at the scale of landscapes and even across the whole nation, what we're really interested in here is very small scale. This could be the scale of a backyard. This could be the scale of an acre or two or a single site. We don't necessarily need giant tracts of land to be resilient. In fact, the key thing here is the close proximity. We don't need species to migrate long distances to find suitable habitats. The second component of landscape resilience is connectivity. This is a little bit more intuitive. Again, keep scale in mind here. We're talking about pretty small scale. So here on a low connectivity, we're talking about a building or a house or a road, things that are simply going to make it that much more difficult for species to move. And so if they do need to move, if they don't have the luxury of being in a highly geodiverse setting, those things are no good. Of course, higher connectivity, something like this, where there's none of those barriers for movement. So those are the two concepts that go into that landscape resilience. And this feeds into the concept called, which some of you may have heard, called conserving nature's stage. And this is another nature conservancy metaphor, and it's really a theater metaphor. If you think about a stage and there's actors, you're at a play, and there's different acts, and the actors kind of come and go between between acts, and they change costumes and change characters. But they're there to play out the story. And what's important there is that there is a physical stage where that action can happen. And so this concept of landscape resilience and conserving nature's stage is protecting the physical landscapes, those geologically diverse features. So you're protecting the stage or the land so that the actors, which are species and natural communities, can play out whatever story they're going to play out. And that's analogous to ecosystem function. And again, the emphasis is then on physical space and ecosystem function over particular species and communities. Not to say those things aren't important, but historically the conservation community has really focused on those things over these other things, which are a little less intuitive and a little less necessary if you're dealing with a static situation. If everything is just going to stay the same, there's no reason to really worry about the geological diversity that could hold, that could accommodate change. So I'm not making all this up. I mentioned Nature Conservancy before. They have this amazing website, maps.tnc.org/resilient land. You can also just Google resilient land, Nature Conservancy or whatever. This is an interactive tool. You can play with the data. You can zoom in, zoom out. You can read all you would ever want to know about all that's baked into this. It is a little bit more complex than just those two factors, but I would encourage you, if this is something that's interesting to you, or maybe even if it's not, take a few moments and check that website out. All right, so back to our, this is still our fourth layer, landscape resilience. You can start to see these areas and why they might be popping out on the map. Again, these developed in agricultural areas. This is just flat as a pancake down here, low resilience. What's interesting is up north, even though we have big blocks of forested habitat and connectivity is generally pretty good, we have very little geological diversity in a lot of these areas. This is all sandy glacial outwash plain. It's super flat, but you see along these river corridors, those are really popping out. And so connectivity is a big deal there. Also, bluffs and things going down to rivers that have those varying slopes and aspects are really important. So Pere Marquette River here, White River, Muskegon River popping out as highly resilient landscapes. And what's interesting is this east part of Kent County too, which is part of a moraine system that stretches all the way down to almost to the Battle Creek area and ends right about here, is an interesting area that we weren't really paying attention to before. All right, so we have our four layers. We smash them all together with some mathematical wizardry, and this is what we get. And this is our final map of what we're calling conservation potential. Again, the orange areas are already protected areas. So from our perspective, they're kind of off the table. They're good to know where they are, but other than that, the darker the green, the higher the conservation potential. So the next or final step in our analysis is to kind of find out where those dark green areas are clustered. And so we find that they're clustered in kind of three different regions with different ecologies. So Lake Michigan shoreline, fairly obvious there. This area up here, which is a lot of that Forest Service land, we've been working for a long time, and will continue to fill in the gaps between some of that public land by protecting some of those, kind of fitting the puzzle pieces together. We're calling that our big forests and wild rivers area. And then there's this area down here, the Eastern Glacial Corridor, which I kind of mentioned is really characterized by this ribbon of moraines. And so we've been doing a pretty good job over our history of working in the Lake Michigan shoreline region, working in the big forests and wild rivers region. This Eastern Glacial Corridor is really brand new to us. We have done some work here. We have some nature preserves there, a couple conservation easements as well, but it's never been a major priority for us until now. So if we go back to our model, look at why that popped out, of course, the reason is this landscape resilience layer. And so we're finding areas that are really important to protect that weren't really on our radar before because we weren't thinking in terms of climate change. And in fact, in our, so we have this strategic conservation plan and our organizational strategic plan. Over the next a few years, we're really going to be focusing our efforts here, both on protecting new land and managing the land that we do own there for climate resilience. So very exciting. And it's kind of neat to see how that works in the model. This too, kind of like the TNC data, although our data isn't maybe quite as fancy, I'd encourage you to check out. We actually just publicly released this strategic conservation plan earlier this week. We've had it done for a while, but if you go to naturenearby.org, you can, there's interactive maps. You can learn about what's each of these regions and what we hope to do in each of those regions. You can learn more about them, about the climate resilient stuff, especially in the Eastern Glacial Corridor. So I want to shift gears a little bit into land management, and in this so after we protect land and we own it or otherwise manage it, that's really my job at the Land Conservancy, is to figure out how we're going to either restore degraded areas or maintain high quality areas. And so over the last couple of years, we've also worked with some partners to help us inject some of those same climate resilience concepts into our land management. So I'm just going to show a few examples of that work. And before I do, maybe just get on the same page with some kind of terminology. So looking at adaptation options, and you might have probably heard the terms mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation typically refers to things like carbon sequestration, lowering carbon dioxide, stuff that you all are working on the political side. That's fantastic. There certainly are some mitigation things that we can do. We tend not to work on hundreds of thousands of acres of scale. So most of the work that we do has a relatively minor effect on things like carbon sequestration, but we are beginning to look at that. But most of our work really falls into this adaptation realm. And so understand that climate change is already happening. It's going to get worse. How can we make sure that the systems that we manage are sustainable, have that ecosystem function, even with more extreme climate scenarios? So there's a few options. We can choose a resistance option. And so this is saying, okay, we want to keep things the way they are. We want to keep things static. Yes, we know climate change is happening, but we want to keep things the way they are. And this is how conservation has sort of focused for most of its lifespan as a discipline. We find high quality systems and we keep them that way. And that may be perfectly valid in certain instances. For example, if we have endangered species, if we have extremely rare ecosystems, things like oak savannas and Karner blue butterfly, which I mentioned a little bit, we may want to keep those as they are, if nothing else, to buy us a little bit more time until we come up with a more comprehensive solution. On the other end is transition. And so this is where we're taking direct action to force an ecosystem into a different state that may be more suitable for future climate scenarios. So things like assisted migration is a great example of this. Planting, taking, say, southern adapted species or even species that aren't native to our area but are native a little further south, bringing those here, planting them, that's a transition, that's directed change. And then in the middle here is, it's called resilience on this figure. There's a little bit of overlap or a little different usage than what we were just talking about with landscape resilience, but the idea here is kind of in the middle of those two approaches. We're making some changes, but we're largely letting the system drive what actually occurs. So we're kind of setting things up for change to happen, but we're not directing that change. So as I go through these few brief examples, maybe think to yourself if it falls into a resistance category, resilience, or transition. And I would say too, before I start going into these examples, we've worked again a lot with partners, including NIACS, which is the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. They're out of Houghton, Michigan. It's actually a cooperation between U.S. Forest Service and Michigan Tech up there. And they have some fantastic resources for applying climate change and climate science to land management. And so they helped us a lot through this process of revisiting some of our management practices and management plans. And by and large, these are not 180-degree shifts of things that from where we were headed anyway. These are largely tweaks and little revisions to make what we're doing a little bit more forward-looking, a little bit more looking through that resilience lens. And I think you'll see that. So the first thing, first example here is we're starting to think a lot more about that restoring ecosystem function rather than restoring systems to either a historical condition or a reference ecosystem, if you've heard that term. And so here on the left, this is a forest at Wegge Natural Area. This is in Lowell. This is a very typical forest here in southern Michigan. You have oaks in the overstory. You have red maple coming up in the understory, shading everything out. Red maple is a native species. It just becomes out of balance in these systems that have either been mismanaged in the past, have undergone a period of fire suppression. These are fire-dependent communities. Long story short, not much happening at all in terms of biodiversity. There's no regeneration of oaks or other species on the forest floor here. Very low diversity, low functioning system. And so historically, we look back at old records and old data, and we know that this used to all be black oak savanna. So a traditional restoration approach might be to save the black oaks. You can see one peeking out right here behind some of these maples. Keep those black oaks in place, take out the maple, and plant more or less prairie species, and really try to restore that historical ecosystem there. Instead, what we did was we didn't totally revert from that approach, but we tweaked it. We actually saved some of the red maple because it is providing a function. It's just out of balance. So we saved some of the red maple. We actually thinned some of the oak as well to get a more diverse canopy. And then underneath, we planted pretty much the most diverse mix of woodland and grassland species that we could find, that we could muster up with our resources. And this is what that same site looks like 2 years after we did the timber harvest. This is not a oak savanna. This is a oak woodlandy savanna-ish kind of thing. But it has incredible ecosystem function and is now has been transformed from this to one of the most biodiverse understories of any forest, frankly, I've seen in West Michigan. And so that's not to pat ourselves on the back or anything, but it's just we're really paying attention to this ecosystem function. There are things happening here now, and that's probably enough. I don't know what this will eventually transition into. We'll continue managing it for some invasive species and fire, things like that. But the focus is really on that ecosystem function. Another way of saying that is that we're beginning to embrace novel ecosystems. When I throw this term out, people think I'm making it up. I'm not. This is actually a term that's, this is what the Society for Ecological Restoration defines it as. A novel ecosystem is a site that because of deliberate or unintentional human activity has composition, structure, or function with no natural analog. And so usually if I'm doing a presentation like this live, I would all ask you for your input here, but instead I will just kind of click through a couple of examples of novel ecosystems, and you can think to yourself, well, I guess I just kind of gave it away, but you can think to yourself, is it a novel ecosystem or not? So the first one here, These are not on our properties, but this is somebody's yard. Really nice little native garden there. Actually, maybe some exotic things in there too. It's right up against this lawn. You've got I think there must be a box elder or something. I don't know what these trees are back here, but I hope it's clear that that's certainly a novel ecosystem. But the key is there's probably some ecological function going on. There's probably some, I don't know if this looks almost like a little bioswale thing. There's probably some water quality benefits. Pollinators are going to love this thing. A lot of diversity. So even though it's a completely artificial system, this looks like nothing you'd ever see in nature. It's probably a pretty decent little habitat for somebody's front yard. Here's another maybe less happy example. This is on a Great Lakes, Lake Erie coastal marsh that's been overtaken with invasive Phragmites. Novel ecosystem? I would say yes. Of course, Phragmites, the spread has been completely facilitated by human activity and all the nutrients that we're dumping into these sites. In where Phragmites is native, it never occurs in these big monotypic stands like this. So definitely novel ecosystem. If you look close, there's some novel geology here. There's some limestone riprap, which certainly is out of place from an ecological perspective. So how about this one? This is Glacier National Park. Looks pretty, I mean, beautiful, quite pristine. But of course, we're in Glacier National Park. There's not too much of a glacier here anymore. We have exposed soils that have never been exposed, or at least in recent memory, so you have kind of these brand new soils exposed to a climate that they've never been exposed to before. You have some areas over here that are, it's almost like permafrost, and they're starting to melt and slump down, and there's actually species that are colonizing these areas that are typically found at much lower elevations. So maybe a more subtle, certainly more subtle than the front yard example. But you could argue that this is very much becoming a novel ecosystem as well. And the argument could be made because climate change, pardon the term, but it's a bit of a trump card of everything now is more or less a novel ecosystem because of the impacts of climate change. So back to our definition here, and then novel ecosystems are the new normal. It's the world that we're dealing in. And that doesn't mean that we're throwing up our hands and giving up. It doesn't mean that we, accept invasive species, just because it's a novel ecosystem. And just because it's a novel ecosystem doesn't mean it's good, right? These are still systems that have varying levels of functionality, varying levels of diversity. So we're just as concerned about biodiversity, maybe even more concerned about biodiversity now. We're just a little less concerned about what species make up that diversity, what species make up those communities, and less concerned about having those natural communities conform to some idealistic type of historical condition. Just a couple more slides here, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions. Another thing we're doing, of course, in line with promoting geological diversity is where we can in these disturbed sites anyway. We don't always have the opportunity to do this, but we're promoting topographic variability on a very small site scale. So this is out of an urban site. This is the Highlands in Grand Rapids. We are working, this was a former golf course, drained and tiled underneath, breaking those drain tiles to get water to pool back on the surface, restore that hydrology and wetland, those wetland features on the landscape. That's work we were going to do anyway, and it does require some excavation, but what we and our partners from the Fish and Wildlife Service decided, we're really going to exaggerate that earth moving so that we have these microhabitats within here. So this is what that same site looks like 2 years later, a little different angle here, but you can see almost analogous to the diagram I had up before. You have these higher hills, xeric species, dry species up here, obviously wetland species inhabiting these zones in very close proximity to each other. These water levels do fluctuate throughout the season and from year to year. So in seasons when this dries up, no problem. These species can come down and colonize. In wetter years or wetter seasons, these water levels raise up and the wetland vegetation and fauna and all of that follows. And then I guess the last thing I would say is looking through the resilience lens lends us a little bit of creativity into finding solutions to otherwise pretty confounding problems. And so this is a picture from Flower Creek Dunes Nature Preserve up in Muskegon County. And this is a forest, this is right on Lake Michigan, back dune forest. So we have tons of this geological diversity, steep dune faces, etc. But all of the canopy tree species are being affected by forest pests. And not all of these are driven by climate change. Some of them are, but for example, all the ash is dead from emerald ash borer that swept through 10 years ago. All the beech is dead because of beech bark disease. Oak wilt is right around the corner. Red oak is another dominant species in these forests. And then here we've got a hemlock component as well, Hemlock woollia delgid, that is a species that is being driven in part by climate change further north. That one is knocking on the door as well. So we have a situation where 4 of our probably 5 canopy tree species are likely not going to be there in 20, 30, 50 years. So, you know, what does resilience on a site look like? And this is a situation where we have again, the physical landforms in place, but if you go back to the conserving nature's stage metaphor, all the actors are changing out. So this is like a changing between Act 1 and Act 2. I don't know what this will look like, right? But how does that affect our management? Should we be going in and planting different species? So more of a transition type of approach? Should we simply let things play out, knowing that we have that kind of natural resilience built in? Those are questions that we're starting to answer, but it's much more freeing to look at a situation like this and be concerned about ecosystem function than it is, oh my gosh, all our trees are dying. This is no longer a dry mesic northern forest that it used to be. So even though these are confounding problems, it actually gives me a little bit of peace to know that not everything has to be perfect, and things will recover. Things will recover, and we'll find a way forward. So with that, I'll stop, and I guess hopefully we have a couple minutes if anybody has any questions.
Chris, would you at least take maybe if there's some questions in the chat, read those first? You're gonna have to unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
Sure. So David Crandall asks, to what extent do you coordinate with other land conservation chapters or organizations?
Yeah, all the time. For example, Nature Conservancy, they're obviously a national, international group. They're active in our area as well. We coordinate with them on projects. We're having a meeting next week with Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy, which is just to the south of us. They're going through a very similar process right now with their strategic conservation planning. And we're looking to see how we can expand some of these concepts even broader regionally. What we also do locally is, again, work with partners who are doing this kind of work in one way or the other. So we work a lot with local units of government, park systems, municipalities to help bring some of this stuff in and help them protect land using some of these concepts.
Good. Good. Okay. Steve Ashmeets asks, does the Conservancy look for land to obtain, or do donors approach you with land?
Well, it's a mix of both. So we're right now with this strategic conservation plan, it's very much our intent that we will be a little bit more proactive in our approach to looking at conservation land. So in the past, it's been a mix, and it will continue to be a mix between opportunistic, somebody approaches us and says, hey, I have this piece of land. Is there a conservation solution here? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, versus us going out and saying, hey, these are the areas that we want to target because of their high conservation potential. Obviously, there's a give and take there, but we're shifting towards the latter, at least conceptually.
Good. Let's see, one question about from John Karnowski regarding, and you kind of touched this a little bit, but how is the development of the former Highlands Golf Course progressing?
Yeah, good question. It's coming along. Yeah, this is a golf course that we don't usually do golf courses. It's kind of a weird project, but we partnered with Blandford Nature Center in Grand Rapids. This is on the west side of Grand Rapids, to purchase an old golf course that went bankrupt. It's right next to Blandford Nature Center there. And we're in the process of restoring that to an urban green space. So, but putting the ecology kind of first, understanding that it needs to be a high quality natural area for it to be able to function well as even a place that people experience and people appreciate. So we're doing all the ecological restoration out there. It's a phased project. We're a couple years in. We keep biting off chunks. We have some exciting projects coming up on the horizon. We've created a bunch of wetlands out there, which I showed a little bit. We've planted, I think now, a little over 50 acres of prairie. We've got about 5,000 trees going in this fall. More next year, and many of those are, well, all of them have been, all the species have been selected to be species that are projected to do well under climate scenarios. So we're not planting things like black spruce, which are at the the southern end of their range. Those things just aren't going to persist. So we've got a couple other big projects coming up. There's an underground stream that flows through the property, so we're going to be daylighting about 1,700 feet of that stream and putting that water back on the surface where it belongs. So it's open to the public. If you're in Grand Rapids on the west side, I encourage you to stop out and see where things are.
Good. Elaine was wondering, first off, a very good presentation, by the way, from Elaine, and I concur, it's very good. Also, he was wondering, how are you financed?
So we're financed through a mix of things. So for many of our large land protection projects, we tap into state and federal grants. For a lot of our operations, local foundations come into play as well, but also private donations as well as a big part. So we're about a third grants, well, a third state and federal, a third foundational, and a third private donors. So it just kind of depends on the project and what we're fundraising for.
Okay. And Mindy, our last question, anyways, Mindy asks, well, whatever. Would a feature like the White Pine Trail be considered of high value because of the potential for high connectivity?
Yes, I think linear features like that absolutely can be. Just thinking about, I'll use an example right now of Karner blue butterfly, because I already mentioned that before. Karner blue butterfly it's a federally endangered butterfly. It kind of occurs in these small patches, and but it needs this metapopulation structure. So it needs little patches of butterflies pretty close to each other, connected, that they can fly in between and kind of migrate and keep those populations stable. And so a lot of times those linear features like roadsides, like right-of-ways can be, like power line right-of-ways, can be really important for the migration of that butterfly. And in fact, one of our preserves in Rockford, where we have the Karner blue butterfly, it's right adjacent to the White Pine Trail. And there's another site not too far away that also has a small population of Karner blue. And, I think it'd be fantastic to be able to use the White Pine Trail there as sort of a stepping stone. But, you know, it kind of depends on the context, but I think even those small areas, again, some of these things operate on pretty small scales, can be really helpful.
Good. Well, that's all I got. Anybody want to unmute yourself and ask questions? Mindy, you had another comment. I'm going to let you make that directly.
I just said, are you going to fire me because I missed the oak wilt outbreak at Salt?
No, it was tricky to find. It was tricky to find. I just happened to get lucky and ran across it, and then we got Nick Sanchez out there. You know Nick, and it was oak wilt, unfortunately. So we'll chat about what that's going to look like. But
now I'm seeing oak wilt everywhere.
Yeah, there's a few hot spots. You know, Rockford area is a big hot spot for it. So I'm actually not surprised it's there. The Lowell area is another big one, and certain pockets along the lakeshore as well.
So this is red oak that is affected by a disease called oak wilt. Am I interpreting this right?
Yeah. Sorry for the side conversation there,
Yeah,
but yeah,
okay.
oak
No,
wilt is
wondering.
it's a fungal disease that affects oaks in the red oak group. So primarily red oak and black oak. It tends to occur in pockets. I won't go into all the biology of it, but it's 100% lethal most of the time to oak, and it can spread through root grafting as well. So most red oaks they're all connected via the roots. So if one tree gets infected, all the other ones that are connected to it get infected as well. So it is a problem. The number one thing to know is it needs an opening, like a wound in an oak tree to spread, and it's active during the growing season. So don't prune or cut oaks at all during the growing season. Wait till winter, and prevention is a heck of a lot easier than dealing with it once it's there.
Great.
Will the oaks come back to an area after oak wilt has come through?
Yes, they will. The trouble though is that a lot of the stumps will resprout after we remove the trees. But those, because the fungus lives in the root systems, then those resprouts are infected as well. So we actually need to kill off all the resprouts. And what we typically will want to do is, if we do want an oak system, we'll plant oaks of the white oak group. So white oak, bur oak, swamp white oak, things like that. But we'll probably actually restrict red oak regeneration, at least for a while, until we know that it's completely dead.
Justin, what's the role of people's gardens in this whole system? Enormous amounts of money is spent on bringing in exotic species and cultivating exotic species and monocultures. Are there demonstration projects as to what you can do somewhere between nothing and disaster? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, lawn grass is not ideal. You know, I don't do a lot of kind of small scale gardening stuff, but it absolutely can make a difference in urban settings to reduce that increase that connectivity, reduce the fragmentation. And so there is a fair amount of research that shows, yes, big blocks of habitat are nice, and they're important and they're critical, but just increasing the small amounts of connectivity in the spaces in between can make a big effect on how species can migrate from one area to another, and the biodiversity of those systems. So it doesn't take much to actually increase the diversity of, well, I mean, if you're starting with a lawn, you're starting with nothing, right? This is a monoculture, especially if you're spraying chemicals on it and whatever. If you just have a few native plants, a few resources for pollinators and things like that, birds, once you attract the insects, the birds will come, and that can make a huge impact if it's repeated over and over throughout an urban area.
And what's the role of all this land in the middle of freeways, these linear national parks, if you like. Is there a role to do something there? It just seems like an enormous intervention.
Yeah, that's great, and they are starting to do that in some areas. I think MDOT is a little further behind, maybe not as progressive as some others, but absolutely. I mean, it's depressing to drive down the highway and see all that essentially wasted land. We could do a lot better.
Good questions. Okay, anybody else? You can just,
Excellent job as always.
yes, very,
Thanks,
very,
Mindy.
yeah. Thank you so much,
Well-
Justin.
well,
We really
thank-
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and yeah, it was enjoyable, and you all keep up the good work as well.
Okay, good.
Back at you.
Thanks, Justin.
All right, good.
Yeah, good man.
See you guys.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Any other comments that needed? And remember that we will be either setting up a call system in regards to working on the voter project, which is going to be whatever time people have to give of that will be helpful, even if you've got only a half hour in a month, whatever it is. We certainly, in supporting and being able to get that information out. We'll have more information coming out certainly in the newsletter, and anyone not getting your newsletter, it comes out the first of the month.